The grey autumn afternoon carried the weight of a lifetime of regrets. Robert Cole, one of the city's wealthiest men, sat on a bench in Central Park, completely oblivious to the bustle around him. His hands trembled as he clutched the divorce papers he had just signed at his lawyer's office, documents that officially sealed the end of a 23-year marriage. Tears streamed down his face, and he didn't care who might see him in this state. For the first time in decades, Robert wasn't worried about his public image or what others might think. The pain was so intense, it broke through all the barriers he had built over the years to shield his emotions. The smell of damp earth filled his nostrils, mixing with the cold air that announced the coming of winter. In the distance, the sound of children playing echoed like a cruel reminder of all he had lost. Helen had always dreamed of having children, but he had always found excuses to postpone that dream. First, he needed to expand the business, then close a few more important deals. There was always something more urgent than building a family. Robert closed his eyes and tried to remember the last time he had truly looked at Helen, not just as the wife who was always there when he came home, but as the woman he had fallen in love with in college. She used to have a light in her eyes when she smiled, a light that made him forget all the world's problems. When had that light gone out? When had she stopped smiling at him? The answer was too painful to face. Helen had given up on him long before she asked for a divorce. She had become a shadow in her own home, walking silently through the corridors of the mansion while he remained locked in his office, taking calls and reviewing reports until the early hours of the morning. A gentle movement beside him made him open his eyes. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, was standing before him. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her hair disheveled by the wind, but her eyes shone with a childlike curiosity that contrasted with the sadness Robert felt emanating from his own being. "Mister, you don't have to cry. Do you want to play with me?" Her voice was as soft as a breeze, filled with an innocence that Robert had forgotten existed in the world. Robert was frozen, unsure how to respond. When was the last time someone had offered to comfort him? When was the last time someone had cared about his feelings? The girl's simple question had a devastating power, touching a wound he didn't even know was there. Robert tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. The girl tilted her head to the side, like a curious little bird, and extended her small, grimy hand toward him. "My name is Sophia. What's your name, mister?" Robert looked at the outstretched hand and felt something stir in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in so long he'd forgotten what it was like. Slowly, he reached out his own hand and touched the girl's small, cold fingers. "Robert," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. Sophia smiled, and in that smile, Robert saw something he had lost long ago: hope. She tugged his hand gently, inviting him to stand up from the bench. "Come on, Robert. I know a place where we can play." Robert hesitated for a moment, glancing around to see if anyone was watching. Then, for a reason he couldn't explain, he stood up and allowed a strange little girl to lead him away from his pain, unaware that this moment would change his life forever. Sophia led Robert to the playground, her small legs bouncing with a contagious energy that contrasted with the weight he carried in his chest. Other children were playing on the swings and slides, their laughter echoing through the cold afternoon air like little bells of joy. "Have you ever played hide and seek?" Sophia asked, stopping near a massive oak tree whose branches spread like protective arms over a small grassy area. Robert frowned, trying to remember. Had he played as a child? He must have, but the memories seemed buried under layers of spreadsheets, meetings, and business strategies. His childhood felt as if it had been devoured by decades of unbridled ambition. "It's been a long time," he admitted, feeling strangely vulnerable before the innocent question of a child. Sophia clapped her hands as if she had just received the best gift in the world. Then I'll teach you. It's really easy. You close your eyes and count to 10, and I'll hide. Then you try to find me. Before Robert could protest or question the sanity of being here in a public park, about to play with a strange child, Sophia had already run off to hide behind a nearby bush. Her small, worn-out sneakers barely made a sound against the ground, covered in dry leaves. "You can start counting," she shouted, her voice muffled by the foliage. Robert stood still for a moment, feeling completely out of place. He was wearing a suit worth nearly $10,000, Italian leather shoes, and a watch that cost more than a mid-size sedan. What was he doing here? But when he looked around and saw other children watching him with curiosity, something inside him gave way. 1, 2, 3. He began to count, closing his eyes, as Sophia had instructed. As he counted, Robert realized he couldn't remember the last time he had closed his eyes without thinking about problems, profits, or responsibilities. For a few precious seconds, his mind was completely empty, focused only on the simple count and the anticipation of finding a hidden little girl. 10. "Ready or not, here I come," he announced, opening his eyes. Sophia wasn't very well hidden. Her small feet stuck out from under the bush, and she was making little noises as she tried to stay still. Robert walked slowly toward her, pretending to look in other places first. "Where could Sophia be?" he murmured, loud enough for her to hear. "Is she behind this tree? No. Is she on the swing? Not there either." He could hear muffled giggles coming from the bush. Finally, he walked over and gently pushed aside some branches. "Found you!" Sophia jumped out from her hiding spot with a radiant smile that lit up her dirty face. "Now it's my turn to seek." They continued playing for almost an hour. Robert found himself running through the park, hiding behind trees and benches, laughing in a way he hadn't in decades. Every time Sophia found him, she celebrated as if she had discovered a treasure. During one of the rounds, while hiding behind a trash can, Robert noticed that a few passers-by had stopped to watch the scene. He recognized the look of surprise on their faces. After all, he was a well-known figure in the city. Robert Cole, the real estate magnate, playing in the park like a child. For a moment, the old Robert almost resurfaced, worried about his reputation and what people would think. But then Sophia found him again, and her genuine joy swept away any concern he might have had. "You're very good at hiding," she said, taking his hand. "Want to play something else?" Robert looked at this little girl, with her mended clothes and her perfect smile, and felt something he had completely forgotten. The desire to protect someone just because she deserved to be protected. The sun began to set, painting the sky in orange hues that mixed with the grey afternoon clouds. Robert and Sophia had played several games, hopscotch, tag, and even make-believe, where she pretended to be a princess and he, a kind dragon protecting her castle. Now sitting on the same bench where it had all begun, Robert watched Sophia swing her little legs as she ate a popsicle he had bought from a street vendor. It was a simple chocolate popsicle, but she savored it as if it were the most delicious of desserts. "Sophia," Robert said softly, "where are your parents?" The question came out naturally, but he immediately noticed the change in the girl's expression. Her smile faded a little, and she stopped swinging her legs. "Ma, I don't have a mom and dad," she answered with devastating simplicity, licking the popsicle as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Robert felt as if he had been punched in the gut. "What do you mean, Sophia? Where do you live?" "I live in different places," she explained, her voice maintaining its childlike innocence, even as she described such a cruel reality. "Sometimes I sleep at the church, when the priest lets me. Sometimes under the bridge, but only when it's not raining. Last night I slept here in the park, near the benches." Every word was like a blade cutting through Robert's heart. How could such a small child speak of such adversity so naturally? How could the world allow a 6-year-old girl to live on the streets, and you don't have any family, no one to take care of you? Sophia shook her head, focused on finishing her popsicle before it melted completely. I had a big brother, Jack. But he left a long time ago. He said he'd come back, but he hasn't yet. Robert closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process the information. His business mind automatically began to calculate solutions, but his heart was too busy feeling a pain he didn't know how to manage. Sophia, where are you going to sleep tonight? I don't know yet, she said with a shrug. I'll look for a safe place when it gets dark. I always find somewhere. The casual way she spoke about her situation was more disturbing than any drama or tears. Sophia had normalized a life that no child should ever have to live. She had developed a resilience that shamed the self-pity Robert felt for his own problems. Aren't you scared, sleeping alone on the street? Sometimes, she admitted, but I close my eyes really tight and pretend I'm in a warm place with a soft bed and a fluffy blanket. Then the fear goes away. Robert felt tears welling up in his eyes again, but this time they weren't tears of self-pity. They were tears of a deep indignation, of a sadness that was not his own, but that of someone he had grown to love in just a few hours. Sophia, are you hungry? Always, she answered with brutal honesty, but not today, because you gave me a popsicle. This was the best day I've had in a long time. Those words echoed in Robert's mind like a painful thunderclap. Her best day had been an afternoon playing in the park with a stranger and eating a $5 popsicle. Meanwhile, he had spent years complaining about dinners at 5-star restaurants, expensive wines he didn't properly appreciate, a life of luxury that had become empty. The contrast was devastating. A child who had nothing valued every small moment of joy, while he, who had everything, had lost the ability to appreciate anything. Sophia, he said, his voice trembling slightly, would you like to have dinner with me tonight? Her eyes lit up as if he had just offered her all the gold in the world. Really? You want to have dinner with me? Of course I do. More than that, I need to. Robert took Sophia to a small, family-run diner near the park, far from the sophisticated places he usually frequented. He didn't want to expose her to the intimidating atmosphere of the luxury restaurants where he was known, nor did he want her to feel out of place. He chose a simple, cozy place where the aroma of home-cooked food hung in the air like a warm hug. Sophia looked around with wide eyes, as if she had entered a palace. To Robert, it was just a modest diner, but to her, it was a world of wonders. The checkered tablecloths, the simple wooden chairs, the menu written in chalk on the wall, everything seemed magical in the girl's eyes. You can order whatever you want, Robert said, watching her study the menu with adult-like seriousness. Anything? She asked, incredulous. Anything. Sophia bit her lower lip, concentrating on her decision. Finally, she pointed to the simplest item on the menu. I want mac and cheese, and maybe an orange juice, if that's not too much to ask. Robert felt a pang in his chest. Even with the freedom to choose anything, Sophia had asked for the most basic dish, as if she didn't think she deserved more. He remembered business dinners where he had spent more on a single meal than many families saw in a month. How about we get that and a steak, he suggested gently. I'm very hungry, and I don't want to eat alone. While they waited for the food, Sophia told him about her life with disarming honesty. She talked about how she had learned to distinguish which adults were safe and which to avoid, about the tricks she had developed to find food and shelter, about how much she missed her older brother who had disappeared. Every story was a stab to Robert's heart. This little girl, who should have been worried only about toys and cartoons, had developed a wisdom of survival that he had never needed to learn. She spoke of loneliness, fear, and uncertainty with a maturity that broke his heart. Robert, Sophia said suddenly, why were you crying earlier today? The question caught him off guard. How could he explain the complex failures of his adult life to a 6-year-old? How could he talk about wounded pride, lost love, and regrets that weighed like mountains? "I lost someone very important," he said finally. "Someone I loved very much, but didn't know how to take care of properly." Sophia nodded seriously. "Was it your family?" "It was. I know what it's like to lose family," she said, placing her small hand on his. "It hurts a lot, doesn't it?" Robert looked at that small, dirty hand on his own and felt a connection he hadn't experienced in years. "It hurts a lot, Sophia, but talking to you is making the pain go away." When the food arrived, Robert watched, fascinated, as Sophia savored every bite as if it were a royal banquet. She ate slowly, enjoying every flavor, every texture. She made little sounds of satisfaction that reminded him of how he had lost the ability to appreciate simple things. "Is it good?" he asked. "It's the best food I've ever had in my life," she answered with absolute sincerity. During dinner, Robert began to realize something disturbing about himself. He had spent decades accumulating wealth, power, and status. But when was the last time he had felt truly happy? When had he savored a meal with genuine pleasure? When had he talked to someone without calculating advantages or strategies? Sophia, with her extreme material poverty, seemed to possess something he had completely lost. The ability to find joy in simple things, to value moments of human connection, to live in the present without getting lost in anxieties about the future or regrets about the past. When they finished eating, Robert didn't want the moment to end. For the first time in a long time, he felt useful, needed in a genuine way, not as the CEO who had to make important decisions, but as a human being who could offer comfort to another human being. When they left the diner, night had fallen and the air was even colder. Sophia shivered slightly, pulling her thin sweater tighter around her body. Robert took off his suit jacket and placed it over her shoulders. She almost disappeared completely inside the expensive garment. "Where are you going to sleep tonight, Sophia?" The question came out more urgently than he had intended. "I'll find a place," she replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Maybe under the awning of that store on the corner. It looks safe." Robert looked in the direction she pointed and saw a narrow awning, exposed to the wind and the damp night air. The thought of leaving Sophia there, alone in the cold, was unbearable. His hands began to tremble, not from the cold, but from an anxiety he couldn't explain. "Sophia," he said, kneeling to be at her eye level, "would you like to sleep in a warm place tonight, with a real bed and blankets?" Her eyes lit up, but then they filled with caution. "Are you talking about your house?" "I am. But you barely know me. What if I do something wrong? What if I break something important?" Her concern was heartbreaking. A 6-year-old girl with nowhere to sleep was worried about being a bother or causing trouble. Robert felt a wave of protectiveness he had never experienced before. "Sophia, you won't break anything, and even if you did, it wouldn't matter. What matters is that you are safe and warm." She studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to decipher his intentions. "I promise you won't hurt me." The question was like a dagger to Robert's heart. How many bad experiences had this child had to develop such caution? How many times had she trusted adults who had let her down? "I promise, Sophia. I just want you to be safe." The drive to the mansion was quiet. Sophia stared out the car window in fascination, watching the city lights go by. Robert drove slowly, prolonging the moments before facing the reality of his impulsive decision. When they arrived at the mansion, Sophia stood at the entrance, her mouth agape. The house, which to Robert was just an empty symbol of his success, looked like a castle in her eyes. "You live here all by yourself?" she asked, incredulous. "Yes," Robert replied, and for the first time he realized how lonely that word sounded. Inside the house, Sophia walked as if in a museum, her hands behind her back, afraid to touch anything. The expensive furniture, the works of art, the crystal chandeliers, everything seemed to intimidate the little girl. "You can touch everything," Robert said softly. "This is your home too, at least for tonight." He took her to one of the guest rooms, a space that had never been used and seemed to have been waiting for someone for years. Sophia climbed onto the king-size bed and disappeared among the pillows. "It's so soft," she said, her voice muffled. "It's like sleeping on a cloud." Robert smiled, a feeling that had become strange to him. "I'll get some clothes for you to change into. Those are very dirty." When he returned with one of his own t-shirts that would serve as a nightgown, he found Sophia fast asleep, still in her dirty clothes, hugging one of the pillows as if it were a teddy bear. He stood there, watching her sleep. Her face, softened by sleep, revealed an innocence that contrasted with the hardness of her life. She breathed gently, finally at peace, finally safe. Robert went down to the living room and sat in his leather armchair, but he couldn't relax. For the first time in a long time, his house didn't feel empty. There was life here, purpose, someone who depended on him for something more important than money or success. He looked around at the expensive, soulless decor that Helen had left behind and felt a painful clarity. He had spent years building a gilded cage where he accumulated expensive objects but lost everything that truly mattered. Sophia had changed something fundamental within him in just a few hours, and Robert knew there was no going back. Robert woke up the next day with a strange feeling. For the first time in months, he had slept soundly. He hadn't spent hours tossing and turning, worrying about meetings or business strategies. The simple knowledge that Sophia was safe in his house had brought a peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. He walked to the room where she had slept and found the bed empty, but the covers were still warm. Following the sound of movement from the kitchen, he went downstairs and found Sophia trying to reach the refrigerator, standing on a chair she had dragged over. "Good morning, Sophia," he said softly. So as not to startle her, she turned with a radiant smile. "Good morning, Robert. I was trying to get some water, but your fridge is too tall." "Let me help you," he said, lifting her up so she could reach whatever she wanted. Sophia laughed at the game, and Robert felt his heart warm in a way he had forgotten was possible. As they prepared breakfast together, Robert noticed how Sophia turned mundane tasks into little adventures. She asked questions about everything: why the bread turned golden in the toaster, how oranges turned into juice, why milk was white. Her curiosity was contagious. "Robert," she said as they ate, "do you have to go to work today?" The question made him stop chewing. Yes, he had meetings scheduled, contracts to review, important decisions to make, but for the first time in decades, those obligations seemed less important than spending time with a 6-year-old girl. "Maybe I can take the day off," he said, surprised at his own words. Sophia's eyes lit up. "Really? Can we play again?" After breakfast, Robert called his secretary, cancelling all his meetings for the day. She was visibly confused. Robert Cole never cancelled work commitments, ever. "Mr. Cole, is everything all right? Are you sick?" "I'm better than I've been in years, Marcia. Just reschedule everything for the rest of the week." He hung up before she could ask more questions, and he and Sophia went out to the park again. This time, Robert had brought a bag with snacks, water, and even a ball he had found forgotten in his storage room. At the park, they played with the freedom of 2 children. Robert chased Sophia, pushed her on the swing, helped her climb the slide. For him, every laugh of hers was like music. Every smile a small victory against the sadness that had dominated his life. It was during a game of tag that Robert noticed the first whispers. A group of women was sitting on a nearby bench, watching them and whispering among themselves. One of them was taking pictures with her phone. "Isn't that Robert Cole?" he heard one of them say. "What's he doing playing with a street kid?" "It must be some kind of PR stunt," another replied. "You know how these rich guys are. They do charity when it's convenient, to clean up their image." Robert felt his face flush, but not with shame, with indignation. How dare they reduce this genuine moment to a calculated strategy? How dare they judge something so pure? More people began to notice and comment. Some took discreet photos, others made loud remarks. Robert realized that Sophia had also noticed the attention, and her smile had faded. "Robert," she whispered, "people are staring at us. Did I do something wrong?" "No, Sophia, you did nothing wrong ever." But Robert knew that this moment had become public, and soon the news of his eccentric friendship with a homeless child would be all over the city. For a moment, his business instincts screamed at him to control the situation, to explain, to justify. Then he looked at Sophia and realized he didn't care what they thought. For the first time in his life, he had found something more important than his reputation. It was the second week Sophia was living in the mansion when everything changed. Robert had grown accustomed to waking up to the sound of her little footsteps running down the halls, to finding drawings scattered across the kitchen table, to hearing her endless questions about the world. His house, once as silent as a mausoleum, had been transformed into a home. That Thursday morning, Robert was teaching Sophia how to make pancakes when the doorbell rang. It was too early for a social call, and his secretary had cancelled all meetings for the week so he could be with Sophia. "I'll get it," Sophia said, jumping down from the chair where she was mixing the batter. "No, wait," Robert said quickly. Something in his gut put him on alert. "Let me see who it is first." Through the electronic peephole, Robert saw a thin young man, about 16, with torn clothes and a hardened expression that belied his age. The boy stared directly at the camera with a disturbing intensity. Robert opened the door, keeping it only ajar. "Can I help you?" "I'm here for my sister," the young man said without preamble, his voice laced with suspicion and something that looked like anger. "I know she's in there." Robert's heart pounded. "Your sister, Sophia. I heard some rich guy was using her to clean up his image. I've come to take her back." Before Robert could respond, Sophia appeared behind him, her eyes widening as she saw the young man. "Jack!" Her voice was an incredulous whisper. "Hey, Soph, I came to get you." Sophia ran to the door but stopped short of hugging her brother, as if something was holding her back. "Where were you? You said you'd come back." "I was working, trying to get some cash for us. But now I hear you're living with this guy." Jack glared at Robert with open hostility. "I don't know what your intentions are with my sister, but she's coming with me now." Robert felt a panic he had never known. In 2 weeks, Sophia had become more important to him than any business deal, any achievement in his entire life. The thought of losing her was unbearable. "Jack," Robert tried to keep his voice calm, "Sophia is safe here. She has food, a warm place to sleep, medical care if she needs it." "And what's the price?" Jack interrupted, his eyes flashing. "Because I know how you rich people work. Nothing is free. What do you want in return?" The accusation hit Robert like a slap. "I don't want anything in return. I just want her to be okay." "Sure," Jack laughed bitterly. "A millionaire decides to become a saint overnight. Must be trying to clean up your act after the divorce, right?" "I saw it in the papers." Sophia looked between the two men, confusion plain on her face. "Jack, Robert is good to me. He doesn't hurt me. He takes care of me. Sophia, you're too little to understand these things. Let's go, now." "No!" Sophia shouted, surprising them all. "I don't want to leave. For the first time in my life, I'm not hungry. I'm not cold. I'm not scared. Why do you want to take me away from this?" Jack looked as if he'd been punched. "Because I'm your brother. Because it's my job to look after you. Because you belong with me, not with some stranger." Robert saw the pain in the boy's eyes and understood something crucial. Jack wasn't just being possessive or suspicious. He was afraid. Afraid of losing the only family he had. Afraid of being replaced. Afraid his sister wouldn't need him anymore. "Jack," Robert said softly, "you can stay too. There's enough room for all of us." The offer caught Jack off guard. He looked at Robert as if trying to find the catch, the ulterior motive, the manipulation. But all he saw was a man desperate not to lose a little girl who had become his family. "I don't need your charity," Jack said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "It's not charity, it's family." The word hung in the air like a promise and a threat, heavy with possibilities that none of the three knew how to process. Jack ended up staying, but his presence brought a tension Robert hadn't anticipated. The young man had accepted a room in the mansion, but maintained a hostile distance, watching Robert's every move with suspicion, like a wild animal ready to pounce if necessary. For the first few days, Jack barely spoke to Robert, communicating only through Sophia. When Robert offered him food, Jack would reply with a curt "thanks," as if the words caused him physical pain. When Robert tried to include him in games with Sophia, Jack would decline and retreat to his room. "He doesn't trust you," Sophia explained one afternoon as they were assembling a jigsaw puzzle in the living room. "Jack says rich people always want something in return." Robert sighed, trying to fit a piece that seemed to have no place. "And you? Do you trust me?" Sophia looked at him with that disconcerting seriousness she had developed far too early. "I trust you. You could have hurt me lots of times, but you never did. You could have sent me away when you found out I have no family, but you let me stay. You're different." "Different how?" "You look at me like I matter. Most people look at me like I'm invisible." That night, Robert found Jack in the kitchen, silently eating a sandwich. It was the first time they had been alone since the young man had arrived. "Jack," Robert said softly, "can we talk?" Jack stopped chewing but didn't answer. "I know you don't trust me. I know you think I have ulterior motives with Sophia. But I need you to understand something. Your sister saved my life." Jack laughed bitterly. "Right. A 6-year-old girl saved a millionaire. It's true. When I found her, I was at the lowest point of my life. I had lost my wife, my family, my purpose. Sophia gave me a reason to live again." "And what's that reason?" Robert hesitated, trying to find words for feelings he was still learning to recognize. "To be needed, to be important to someone for real, not for my money or influence, but for who I am. Sophia reminded me that there's more to life than financial success." Jack studied Robert's face for a long moment. "You know she cries sometimes at night." Robert's heart skipped a beat. "Cries? Why?" "Nightmares. She dreams you're going to get tired of her and send her away. She dreams this is all temporary, that she'll wake up on the street again." Robert felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. I would never do that to her." "But she doesn't know that. Sophia's been abandoned a lot. Our parents left us when I was 12. Several families who promised to adopt us changed their minds. She's learned that adults lie." Robert closed his eyes, picturing Sophia waking up alone in the dark, terrified that her new life was just a dream. "What can I do to make her know I'm here to stay?" Jack watched him with curiosity. "Why is this so important to you?" "Because for the first time in 45 years, I feel like my life has a real purpose. Because when I look at Sophia, I see the chance to be the man I was always supposed to be. Because I love her as if she were my own daughter." The words came out unfiltered, raw and honest. Jack was silent for a long time, processing what he had heard. "You know," Jack said finally, "Sophia talks about you all the time. Robert taught me this. Robert said that. She's never talked about anyone like that before. And you, how do you feel about that?" Jack sighed deeply. "Scared. Sophia is all I have in the world. If I lose her, you won't lose her, but maybe you could gain a bigger family." Jack looked at Robert with a vulnerability he tried to hide behind his hostility. "You really want both of us to stay?" "More than anything." The third week brought a complication Robert hadn't anticipated. It was a Monday morning when two women in austere business suits rang the doorbell, carrying briefcases and serious expressions that put Robert immediately on alert. "Mr. Robert Cole?" the older woman asked, flashing an official ID. "I'm Dr. Carmen Wallace from Child Protective Services, and this is my colleague, Dr. Anna Reed. We've received reports concerning unsupervised minors residing at your property." Robert's world seemed to crumble. Sophia and Jack were in the living room watching cartoons, oblivious to the storm that was gathering. Robert tried to remain calm, but his hands started to shake. "Reports?" he managed to ask. "Multiple anonymous reports alleging that you are keeping two children in an irregular situation. We need to speak with them and assess their living conditions." Robert knew he couldn't stop the investigation, but the panic of losing Sophia and Jack was overwhelming. "Of course, they're in the living room, but I need to clarify that." "Mr. Cole," Dr. Wallace interrupted him. "We understand your intentions may be good, but there are legal protocols for the protection of minors. Children can't simply live with adults without the proper procedures." When the social workers entered the living room, Sophia instinctively hid behind Robert, while Jack stood up, tense and defensive. Robert's heart broke seeing the fear in Sophia's eyes. "Sophia, Jack," Dr. Reed said in a gentle voice. "We're from Child Protective Services. We've come to talk with you to make sure you're safe and well cared for." "We don't want to leave," Sophia said immediately, clinging to Robert's leg. "Robert takes good care of us." "No one said you're leaving, sweetie. We just want to ask a few questions." The next 2 hours were the longest of Robert's life. He watched helplessly as the social workers asked detailed questions about how Sophia and Jack had come to be there, about their living arrangements, about the nature of their relationship with Robert. Jack, more mature, answered cautiously, clearly trying to protect the situation. Sophia, on the other hand, spoke with enthusiasm about her new life. The games, the food, the feeling of safety, how Robert had become her family. "And before you came here," Dr. Wallace asked, "where did you live?" Sophia looked down. "On the street, or in different places, always hungry, always cold. And Mr. Cole, how does he treat you?" "Like we're his real kids," Sophia answered without hesitation. When the social workers finished questioning the children, they asked to speak with Robert privately. Sophia refused to let him go, and Jack stayed close, clearly worried. "Mr. Cole," Dr. Wallace said, "the children are visibly well cared for and show genuine affection for you. However, there is no legal documentation to legitimize this situation." "What does that mean?" Robert asked, though he feared the answer. "It means that, technically, these children are in an irregular situation. Without formal adoption or temporary guardianship proceedings, they should be in an appropriate institution until a suitable family is found." "But I am a suitable family," Robert protested. "They're happy here, safe, loved." "We understand that, sir. But there are protocols. We need to ensure you've passed background checks, psychological evaluations, preparatory courses." "How long would that take?" Jack asked, speaking for the first time. "The full process can take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. Sophia began to cry, understanding even without fully comprehending that her new family was being threatened. Robert picked her up, feeling his own voice tremble. "And until then, the children would need to stay in an appropriate institution, a shelter." Robert felt as if the floor had disappeared from under his feet. After finding a purpose, a family, a reason to live, it could all be taken away by bureaucracy and procedures. "Please," he whispered, "don't break up our family." In the 4th week, when Robert thought things couldn't get more complicated, Helen showed up. He was in the garden playing soccer with Sophia and Jack when he heard the familiar sound of her car's engine in the driveway. His heart stopped for a moment. Helen got out of the car with the elegance that had always characterized her, but there was something different in her posture. She was thinner, with dark circles under her eyes that her makeup couldn't completely hide. When her eyes met Robert's, he saw a complex mix of emotions he couldn't decipher. "Robert!" Sophia ran to him, not noticing the tension that had settled in the air. "Who's that pretty lady?" Robert swallowed hard. "Sophia, Jack, this is Helen. She was my wife." Helen approached slowly, studying the two children with an expression Robert couldn't interpret. There was curiosity, but also something that looked like pain. "So these are the famous children causing such a stir in the media," Helen said, her voice carefully neutral. "Helen," Robert began, "they're not a PR stunt or—" "I know," she interrupted him softly. "I saw the photos, read the articles. I also talked to a few people who saw you together in the park." She paused, looking directly at Sophia. "Do you really play with him?" Sophia nodded enthusiastically. "Robert's the best to play with. He taught me how to swing, how to make sandcastles, and even how to make pancakes." Helen looked at Robert with genuine surprise. "Only pancakes? You didn't even know how to fry an egg when we were married." "I learned," Robert said simply. "Sophia taught me a lot of things." Jack remained silent, observing the interaction with the caution he had developed when it came to adults. Robert could tell the young man was preparing to protect Sophia if needed. "Robert," Helen said, "can we talk in private?" They walked to the porch, leaving the children playing in the garden under Jack's watchful eye. Helen leaned against the railing, looking at Sophia, who was laughing as she tried to juggle the soccer ball. "Why did you come back?" Robert asked, unable to hide the hope in his voice. "Because I needed to see it with my own eyes," Helen replied. "When I first heard the stories, I thought it was some kind of marketing ploy to clean up your image after the divorce. But then, Helen turned to face him. "Then I started getting reports from people who saw you together. They said things that didn't make sense for the Robert I knew. That you were laughing, that you were playing, that you seemed happy." Robert felt a tightness in his chest. "And that bothered you?" "It devastated me," Helen admitted, tears welling in her eyes. "But because I realized a 6-year-old girl had managed to do what I tried to do for 23 years, make you human again." The words hit Robert like a punch. "Helen, No." She raised a hand. "Let me finish. I watched from a distance as you transformed into someone I didn't recognize. I saw you become caring, attentive, present. I saw you prioritize something other than work. And it hurt, Robert. It hurt because it made me question if I was wrong to give up on us." Robert stood in silence, processing her words. Sophia ran up to the porch at that moment, interrupting the tense conversation. "Robert, Jack says it's going to rain. Can we make cookies inside?" She looked at Helen with curiosity. "Do you want to make cookies with us, Mom?" Helen looked at the little girl, then at Robert, and something in her expression softened. I don't know how to make cookies." "I'll teach you," Sophia said excitedly, taking Helen's hand. "It's really easy." Robert didn't know how either, but now he makes the best cookies in the world. As Sophia pulled Helen toward the kitchen, Robert stood on the porch, watching his ex-wife being dragged along by a child who had changed everything in his life. For a moment, he dared to imagine a possibility that seemed impossible. What if Sophia could save not only his life, but his marriage as well? The afternoon in the kitchen was surreal. Robert watched Helen try to follow Sophia's enthusiastic instructions for making chocolate chip cookies, her elegant hands struggling with the sticky dough. It was a scene he had dreamed of thousands of times during their marriage, Helen interacting with a child, their house filled with childish laughter. "No, not like that," Sophia laughed. showing Helen how to mix the ingredients. "You have to do it with love, or the cookies will be sad." Helen smiled genuinely for the first time since she had arrived. "Cookies get sad?" "Of course. Robert taught me that food can feel when you make it with love. That's why everything he cooks is yummy." Robert felt Helen look at him over Sophia's head, an indescribable expression in her eyes. During their marriage, she had begged him to cook with her, to participate more in domestic activities. He had always refused, saying he didn't have time for that sort of thing. When the cookies were in the oven, Sophia ran off to the garden to find Jack, leaving Helen and Robert alone in the kitchen for the first time in months. "She's right about the food," Helen said softly. "You can feel the difference." "Helen," Robert began, but she interrupted him. "Robert, I need to ask you some hard questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me." He nodded, bracing himself for what was to come. "These children, this isn't to prove a point to me, is it? It's not an attempt to show me you've changed to win me back." The question was direct and painful. Robert took a moment before answering. "No. When I found Sophia, I wasn't even thinking about you coming back. I was only thinking about how empty my life had become. She saved me, Helen. She literally saved me." "Saved you how?" Robert leaned against the counter, searching for the right words. "That day in the park, when I signed the divorce papers, I was thinking of ending it all. I didn't see any point in continuing to live such an empty life." Helen brought a hand to her mouth, horrified. "Robert, Sophia showed up at the exact moment I needed hope the most. She reminded me that there is kindness in the world, that there is unconditional love, that there is a purpose beyond accumulating money." Tears streamed down Helen's face. "And now? What do you want now?" "I want to be the father that Sophia and Jack deserve. I want to use my life to protect them, to love them, to be the man a 6-year-old girl saw potential in me to be. And me, where do I fit into this?" Robert looked deep into Helen's eyes. "That's up to you. I love you, Helen, I always have, but I can't go back to who I was. I can't abandon Sophia and Jack for anything or anyone. They are my family now, even if it means losing any chance of winning me back." Even then, Helen was silent for a long moment, processing his words. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse with emotion. "You know what the cruel irony of all this is, Robert? I always wanted children. I always dreamed of seeing you playing with our kids, of having a real family. And now you have that, with children who aren't biologically yours. Helen, but here's what hurts the most," she continued, the tears flowing freely. "Watching you with Sophia today, seeing how you look at her with so much love, how you devote yourself to her completely. I finally saw the man I fell in love with in college, the man I thought I had lost forever." Robert hesitantly reached out his hand, and Helen took it. "The question is," she whispered, "is it too late for us? Can a family we didn't plan for become the family we always dreamed of?" Before Robert could answer, Sophia burst into the kitchen. "The cookies are ready. Let's all eat them together," as she pulled them toward the oven. Neither Robert nor Helen missed the significance of her words. All together. The 5th week brought the crisis Robert had feared since day one. Sophia woke up in the early hours of Tuesday morning with a high fever and difficulty breathing. Robert found her in her room, pale and shivering, her lips a bluish color that filled him with panic. "Sophia, what's wrong?" he whispered, lifting her into his arms. "I can't breathe right," she managed to say between short, difficult breaths. Robert didn't hesitate. He woke Jack and, still in his pajamas, rushed Sophia to the nearest hospital. The entire way, she remained in his arms, each labored breath cutting through his heart like a blade. In the emergency room, doctors immediately took Sophia to intensive care. Robert paced the waiting room like a caged animal, while Jack sat in silence, his fists clenched with worry. "Mr. Cole, a young doctor approached after 2 hours that felt like an eternity. I'm Dr. Patricia. I've been taking care of Sophia. How is she? Robert asked, his voice hoarse with anguish. She has a congenital heart condition that likely went unnoticed due to a lack of regular medical care. It's serious, but treatable. Robert's legs felt weak. Treatable how? She needs heart surgery. It's a complex procedure, but it has a high success rate. Without the surgery? The doctor hesitated. Without the surgery, what? Her condition will progressively worsen. Mr. Cole, she needs this surgery within 2 weeks at most. Then we'll do the surgery. Whatever it takes, money is no object. The doctor exchanged a look with the nurse beside her. Mr. Cole, there's a legal problem. To authorize a surgery of this magnitude on a minor, we need consent from the parents or legal guardians. Robert felt the world crumble. But I'm responsible for her. She lives with me. Sir, I understand the situation, but legally, you don't have formal custody of her, without adoption papers or temporary guardianship. But that could take months, Robert shouted, drawing stares from other families in the waiting room. Sophia doesn't have months. Jack stood up, approaching them. What if I sign? I'm her older brother. The doctor shook her head gently. You're a minor too, Jack. We would need a legally responsible adult. Robert ran his hands through his hair, desperate. What happens if we can't sort this out? The hospital will be forced to transfer Sophia to the custody of the state until the legal situation is resolved. They will decide on her treatment. No! Robert exploded. You're not taking her from me now. Not when she needs me most. 2 hours later, Helen arrived at the hospital. Robert had called her in desperation, not knowing who else to turn to. She walked into the waiting room to find Robert sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, with Jack beside him, both looking devastated. How is she? Helen asked, kneeling beside Robert. She needs heart surgery, but they won't let me authorize it because legally, I'm nothing to her. Helen, they might take her from me. Helen looked at the man who had been her husband for over 2 decades, seeing him more broken than ever, more vulnerable than he had ever allowed himself to be. Robert, she said softly, are you willing to do anything to save Sophia? Anything, even if it means exposing our entire private life, our failures, our history, to get emergency custody? Robert looked at her, confused. I'm saying that maybe. If we get married again, if we present ourselves as a stable couple seeking to adopt, the process could be expedited. It's a long shot, but Robert held her gaze. You would do that for Sophia. I would do it for Sophia, and maybe for us too. Helen, are you sure this would change everything? She looked through the glass into Sophia's room, where the little girl lay, connected to machines, and then back at Robert. Our family is in that bed. Robert, let's go fight for her. The next 5 days were a whirlwind of paperwork, lawyers, emergency hearings, and desperate phone calls. Robert and Helen remarried in a quick civil ceremony at the hospital itself, with Jack as a witness and Sophia sleeping under sedation just a few feet away. This isn't exactly how I pictured our second wedding, Helen whispered as they signed the documents. It's more important than any dream, Robert replied, holding her hand. The judge who reviewed the emergency case was moved by their story. Robert had used all his influence, but more than that, he had opened his heart completely, explaining to anyone who would listen how Sophia had saved him, how Jack had become the son he never had, how this unlikely family had become the most real thing in his life. Mr. and Mrs. Cole, the judge said during the hearing, this is a highly irregular situation. However, given the medical emergency and the clear evidence of the children's well-being under your care, I am granting emergency temporary custody so you may authorize the necessary medical treatment. Robert felt his legs almost give out from relief. Sophia's surgery lasted 8 hours. Robert, Helen, and Jack took turns in the waiting room, unable to eat, unable to think about anything but the little girl fighting for her life. During those hours, something magical happened between Robert and Helen. They rediscovered each other, not as the couple they had been, but as the parents they were becoming. "Remember when we used to dream about having kids?" Helen whispered during the 5th hour of waiting. "I was so afraid I wouldn't be a good father," Robert admitted. "And the irony is, it took a child who was already here to teach me how to be a dad, and to teach me how to be a mom," Helen added, tears in her eyes. When the surgeon finally appeared, exhausted but smiling, Robert felt his heart start beating again. The surgery was a success. Sophia is a very strong little girl. She'll need a few weeks to recover, but she should go on to live a completely normal life. Robert hugged Helen and Jack at the same time, the three of them crying with relief and joy. During the 2 weeks of recovery in the hospital, a new family took shape. Helen spent entire days reading to Sophia, painting her nails and braiding her hair, all the things she had dreamed of doing with a daughter. Jack, initially suspicious of Helen, gradually opened up as he saw the genuine care she had for his sister. "Are you really going to stick around?" Jack asked Helen one afternoon while Sophia was sleeping and Robert had gone to get coffee. "Forever," Helen promised. "Sophia taught me something important. Sometimes, the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into, and you're not going to fight with Robert anymore." Helen smiled, thinking of how much Robert had changed. "We still disagree sometimes, but now we know what's really important. Before, we fought about money, work, schedules. Now, our only concern is making sure you and Sophia are happy and safe." When Sophia was finally discharged from the hospital, she ran into the mansion as if seeing it for the first time. But something was different. Helen's things were back, family photos had appeared on the tables, and the house had a cozy, lived-in feel. It felt like a home. "Robert," Sophia said that first night, snuggling in bed between him and Helen, "are you and Helen going to be my mommy and daddy forever?" Robert looked at Helen over Sophia's head, both understanding the weight of that question. "If you'll have us, my love," Helen said softly. "More than anything in the world," Sophia whispered. That night, as Robert listened to Helen humming a lullaby to Sophia with the quiet breathing of Jack coming from the next room, he realized that losing everything he thought mattered had led him to everything that truly did. Sophia hadn't just saved his life, she had saved his ability to love, to be vulnerable, to choose family over ambition. She had given him and Helen a second chance, not just at their marriage, but at becoming the people they were always meant to be. 6 weeks after that fateful encounter in the park, Robert found himself on the same bench where it had all begun. But this time, he wasn't alone and desperate. Sophia was running around the playground with renewed energy, her mended heart allowing her to play as any 6-year-old should. Jack was teaching younger kids how to play soccer, having found his own sense of purpose in helping others. Helen was pushing Sophia on the swing, their laughter echoing through the air like a song Robert had forgotten existed. Watching them together, he still couldn't believe how drastically his life had changed. The woman he had lost through neglect was now back, not as the wife he took for granted, but as a true partner in building a family neither of them had expected. "Higher, Mommy Helen," Sophia shouted from the swing, using the title that had become natural for her. "Not too high, princess," Helen laughed. "You just got that heart fixed, remember?" Robert smiled, watching Helen's natural maternal instincts blossom. During these weeks, he had witnessed her transform from a bitter divorcee into a devoted mother who stayed up late when Sophia had nightmares, who learned to cook her favorite foods, who filled the house with a warmth that had been absent for years of their marriage. "Daddy, Robert!" Sophia jumped off the swing mid-air, landing safely on the grass and running to him. "Look what I found." She opened her small palm to reveal a tiny wildflower she had picked. It was simple, common, but she offered it to him as if it were the most precious gift in the world. "For you," she said seriously, "because you saved me." Robert knelt to accept the flower, feeling tears threaten his eyes. "Sophia, you're the one who saved me. Then we saved each other," she concluded with a 6-year-old's wisdom that never ceased to amaze him. Jack came over to them, a little breathless from his soccer practice with the kids. In these weeks, Robert had watched the teenager transform from a wary, hardened street kid into a young man who was learning to trust again, to laugh again, to believe that good things could happen to people like them. "Robert," Jack said, "some of the kids here have nowhere to go tonight. Their parents are working the night shift, and there's no one to pick them up." Robert glanced at Helen, who was walking toward them. They had already discussed this possibility, using their resources to help other children in need, expanding their capacity to love beyond just Sophia and Jack. "What do you think?" Robert asked Helen. "Ready for a full house tonight?" Helen's smile was radiant. "I was hoping you'd ask." As they gathered the children who needed a place to stay for the night, Robert reflected on the irony of his situation. 6 weeks ago, he was a man who measured success in quarterly reports and profit margins. Now, he measured it in the laughter of children, in the healthy beat of Sophia's heart, in Jack's shy smiles, in the contented sighs from Helen as she tucked Sophia into bed each night. His cell phone buzzed with another business call, but for the first time in decades, Robert declined it without even checking who was calling. His secretary had learned to handle most things without him. And surprisingly, his business was doing better than ever, perhaps because he finally had perspective on what truly mattered. That night, the dining room was filled with 6 children of various ages, all eating dinner together like a big family. Robert watched Sophia help a younger child cut their meat, watched Jack patiently explain homework to an older girl, watched Helen move between them all like a natural-born mother. "Robert," Helen said later, when all the children were asleep, "do you have any regrets about giving up your old life for this beautiful mess?" Robert looked around his house, now filled with the evidence of life. Toys scattered over the expensive furniture, children's drawings taped to the walls, photo albums documenting his new family's adventures. "Helen," he said, pulling her close, "I spent 45 years building a life that looked like a success on the outside, but was completely empty on the inside. Sophia taught me that true wealth isn't what you accumulate. It's what you give, what you share, who you love unconditionally." As they passed by Sophia's room, they could hear her talking in her sleep. "Thank you, God, for giving me the best family in the world." Robert kissed Helen's forehead, finally understanding that sometimes you have to lose everything you think you want to discover, everything you truly need. A little girl's innocent question, "Mister, you don't have to cry. Do you want to play with me?" had led him to a richness far beyond anything he had ever imagined possible.